Things are looking very, very dicey for the reign of this last member of the Julio Claudian family. What is going to happen? Everybody wants to know. This is, as I said a moment ago, a critical juncture for the evolution of the imperial state. And this is a time when a historian like Tacitus can observe that the secrets of empire are being revealed. Well, I think conceptually what this means is that, well, Rome has never had an emperor before the rise of Augustus. It has never had an emperor who was from a different family than the Julio Claudian dynasty. And a lot of people are still kind of wondering, what is this Rome in which we now live? Is it a monarchy? Is it a republic under the influence of an influential individual who can be either a good influence or a bad influence? Is it something else? And especially, what happens to a system like this when that family, which is the only one that they've known in power up to this point, when that family is gone, a lot of things are about to be revealed. These are what Tacitus calls the secrets of empire, and they help people see where the power really lies. Well, for now, let's back up a second from when we said a moment ago that Galba heard that Nero had died. Let's resurrect Nero momentarily. Back in Rome, because he had in fact come to Rome from Naples, Nero had been disheartened by hearing about how widespread this uprising against him was. Some of those governors joining in this group were among his trusted friends and representatives. He also heard that Tigellinus, that sole remaining Praetorian prefect, had fled for his life, and the person he had left in charge was now bribing the members of the Praetorian Guard, to support Galba. Galba, that Lusitanian governor, who was being put forward as a possible replacement for Nero. Nero was on the run finally by now. He was hiding out in a friend's villa and heard all of these things, including the news that he himself had been declared a public enemy. This must have been heartbreaking for Nero. After all, he had started out his reign with high hopes. He had had a pretty good run for the first few years. He had faithfully and dutifully followed the advice of his elders. But eventually, at a certain point, maybe after 5 years or a little bit longer, he had realized he was not the man for this job. There were other things to which his talents were better suited. But once you're emperor, there's no stepping back from that, except by some very violent means, probably. So Nero now realizes everybody has turned against him, and before they have the chance to make that antipathy forcefully felt, Nero realizes it's time for him to put himself out of the way. He ends up stabbing himself to death. The traditional mode of suicide for a Roman military man is falling on his sword. For a senator, it's opening his own veins, basically slitting the wrist, but more effectively than just the wrist, and letting all your blood run out. That's how some of those Stoic senators who had been put down by Nero had evaded their fate. Nero's not a senator and he's not a military man. He's not really a philosopher either. He probably does not have the physical courage to fall on his own sword. I'm not saying that I would have it either. In the end, though, he faces the necessity, and with the aid of one of his own trusted freedmen, he gets himself stabbed to death. The story is that as he was expiring, he uttered this pathetic phrase, Qualis artifex pereo. It's hard to translate that precisely, but it means something like, "Oh, what an artist I am in dying." Not that he's saying that his death itself is a work of art, but he's expressing what he thinks is the tragedy that the world of art and creativity had lost somebody with his talents when he died. A very pathetic statement. Maybe some truth to it. Well, now the family of Augustus and Tiberius is gone. No more Julio Claudians around. So, what's going to happen with the succession? Well, the dynastic principle is not going to be of much help. Nero had not managed to find somebody in whom he could place his trust and adopt him as a successor. He probably did not intend to die anytime soon, and by the time he realized he was about to die, he was way too self preoccupied to do anything about that. So, no adoptee, no natural born son or co emperor. That's not going to help determine the next princeps. Although there were a couple of, which I guess you should call pretenders. These were people who claimed that they were, in fact, the sons of Gaius Caligula, or maybe other types of members of some branch or other of the Julio Claudian dynasty. But as we've heard, members of the Praetorian Guard and some others are now looking to Galba, who was a distinguished senator and who was one of the governors in Spain. And he was officially, therefore, at this turn of events, he was officially acclaimed by the Senate as the next emperor. Galba was 71 years old. He was very distinguished. He had a lot of experience. Unfortunately, he was also the victim of what Tacitus calls, in a really cruel twist of phrase, he was the victim of the widespread belief that in the end he was capax imperii nisi imperasset. The Latin phrase means he was a capable emperor, or at least seemed to be, until he actually was emperor. In other words, they had a lot of trust and hope and faith in him until he proved he was not up to the job. Actually, he was quite old. He took several ill-considered actions, like coming down pretty harshly on troops that had remained loyal to Nero, punishing them for that loyalty, which was a bad move. People saw that they could get in trouble no matter what they did. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. So in the end, Galba lasted only 6 months as emperor, including the first few weeks of the next year. He's the first emperor to reign during the year 69 CE. At this juncture is where Tacitus observes that the real secrets of empire begin to be revealed. These arcana imperii, those are the secrets of empire. And the one that Tacitus is talking about right here is the fact that it was possible for an emperor to be created, to become emperor at a place different from Rome, elsewhere than at Rome. Specifically, at this point, middle of January 69 CE, the troops turned to Otho. He's that other provincial governor. He had been a close friend of Nero, and in fact, he was the one with whose wife Nero had been carrying on. Otho felt he had a chance at taking over power, and with his rather ample stores of money, he bought off the Praetorian Guard. They turned on Galba and lynched him, putting Otho in power. Galba is the one on the upper right on this slide here, and Otho is the rather chubby looking one just to the left of him. Well, this also did not last very long, because while it could, in fact, be the case that an emperor could be created outside Rome, the one who really did this most effectively was the next person to take the title, namely the emperor and before emperor, the Roman governor, Vitellius, commander of some of the Rhine armies. Vitellius would be imposed forcefully as emperor by some members of those legions. They ended up regretting the choice of Otho, who was really not much more than a courtier and a friend of Nero's. And they felt that Vitellius, who was a successful general, could be an effective leader as well. After all, remember, support of the troops is a key element to ruling for a long time, at least ruling for a long time successfully. So Vitellius, knowing he has a pretty strong basis for this, marches his armies from Germany south across the Alps to a junction in North Italy and a major battle at a city called Cremona there in North Italy. Vitellius ended up being exposed as not really much of a politician. Really, what Vitellius was a tool of army kingmakers. Not that he wasn't a good general himself, but without the backing of a large number of the troops and some of their own generals, his undisciplined nature made itself felt. He was incapable of holding back on some of the harsh measures that he had in mind. Once he attained Rome, they say, he threw off all restraints and became the next thing to another Nero, spending money right and left, dissipating the treasury, costing himself the loyalty of his own troops, spending for his own purposes all the money that his troops had been expecting to receive as their victory bonus. That is the turn of events, still within the year 69 CE, when the armies and Rome as a whole turned to another commander. His name is Vespasian. His portrait bust is there on the right-hand side of this slide, and we've seen him before. Vespasian is that man who had been sent to take command of the field armies in Syria, and he, following the example of Vitellius, got the idea that why not me? I've got a lot of loyal troops, I have some political experience, and I have a lot of ambition. Vespasian was still in the East when he was first acclaimed as the next candidate for the emperorship. And in fact, he was hailed as emperor by a person named Tiberius Alexander. Tiberius Alexander was serving as governor of Egypt. In other words, the emperor's representative in Egypt. And he turned his back on the emperor, encouraged Vespasian to make a bid for empire. That would lead to another battle in northern Italy, where after some months, Vespasian brings sizable forces there and manages to get himself placed in power after defeating Vitellius. There are some interesting things happening in his rear. This is in fact still the scene of the ongoing Jewish rebellion. Vespasian had been put in charge of putting it down, but I guess he saw his own imperial ambitions as more important, because he left the Jewish war under the command of one of his sub-commanders, namely his own son, Titus. When Vespasian does successfully place himself in power, he'll stay there until the end of the year. So that makes this year, the year 69 CE, a year when four different individuals held power as officially acclaimed emperor in succession. Vespasian will be the one to finish it out, and he'll stay on as emperor for 10 whole years, meaning he's there to establish his family firmly in power as a new dynasty. His family name was Flavius. The middle name, remember, is the family name or the Gentile name. Titus Flavius Vespasianus is this first emperor of the family. When he dies, he will leave power to his son, who has the same name, but we know him as Titus. And in the end, Titus will not reign very long. He will leave power to his brother, Titus Flavius Domitianus, the emperor whom we know as Domitian. That's the full extent of the next Roman imperial dynasty, and it's a hugely interesting, although relatively short dynasty, is very interesting in itself. We'll devote a good amount of time to discussing how the empire evolved and how Rome itself evolved under the leadership of this new family, the first group of non-Julio Claudians to serve as Roman emperor. See you there.